Morning, everyone. Please welcome Tim Paz, Chief Industrial Hygienist with the Defense Health Agency, with nearly 30 years of experience across sectors like aerospace, environmental remediation, hospital administration, medical research, military health, brings deep expertise in occupational safety. Today, I'll present on respirator fit testing, including a live demonstration to highlight best practices and proper technique.
Morning. It's a great honor to be part of this conference. I want to thank the planning committee for inviting me to talk about something I'm very passionate about, respiratory protection. I was trying to think of a good icebreaker and I really couldn't come up with anything. When you're a respirator geek, about the best you can do is I thought about how much volume of air does a human breathe in their lifetime? It's just things that keep me up at night, I guess. The answer I came up with was 270 million liters, and that's using a conservative breathing rate estimate of 7 liters a minute over a global average lifespan of 73 years. So I'm not sure what you could do with that, but maybe at the next cocktail party, you can win a free drink. But I'm going to talk about the essentials of respirator fit testing, and I commend the planning committee for including this topic because I think it's often overlooked. And one example of that, at least in my opinion, is that we do not currently have an accreditation program for respirator fit test operators. So it's really incumbent upon the respiratory protection program administrator to ensure that the fit test operator is competent, that they have the proficiency to do what we're asking them to do, is to protect employees with their last line of defense. And so today I'm going to talk about why we fit test employees, the regulatory framework. I'll discuss consensus standards regarding fit testing. I'll discuss the fit testing methods. I'll talk about documenting fit test results. I'll cover human errors that we often see, and I'll touch upon some common misconceptions with respirator fit testing, and we'll culminate with a live demonstration of a qualitative fit test. And so this is the disclaimer, and you can read that, but I'll just move along for the interest of time. So there's a lot of reasons why we conduct fit testing. Of course, there's a legal requirement to do so. I will mention that over the last 12 years, with one exception, the respiratory detection standard has been the most often cited citation from OSHA. I think in fiscal year 2023, it dropped down to number 7. But by and large, the rest of the last 12 years, it's been in the top 5 OSHA violations. And I also reference a 2007 study NIOSH did, private sector companies, only 43% were conducting respirator fit testing. I surmise that many of those were probably medium to small companies, but it kind of accentuates the problem that we currently have, at least in the U.S. We also want to reduce the inhalation of air contaminants. We want to make sure that the respirator fits the employee and that there's at least, I don't like to say respirators are comfortable, that there's a high tolerability factor with the model that they're trying on. It's also a good opportunity to reinforce proper donning technique and making sure that they're conducting the proper inspection of the respirator. And of course, we do it to prove compliance with the standard. And there was another study done more recently where they found that over time, the failure rate of successful fit testing went down. After 1 year, it went down 10%. In the second year, 20%, and in the third year, 26%. So that annual fit testing requirement probably isn't going away anytime soon. And then I would argue that there's a moral imperative that we do the right thing by making sure that the employees have a proper fitted respirator. I would also mention that the overarching goal is to ensure that our employees are not incurring any adverse health effect. That's really the overarching goal, I think, with any respiratory protection program. So we have tight-fitting respirators, loose-fitting respirators. On the left side of the slide, you see the half-face model. The air, once your diaphragm expands and you suck in air, it goes through the filter, hopefully, and there's no leakage. But it will go through the filter, get filtered, and then when you exhale, you can see the yellow arrows will, hopefully the air will push out of that exhalation valve. And with a loose-fitting respirator, the air gets filtered through a filter, some type of filter or cartridge mechanism, and the air is pushed through the respirator through a mechanical means, a motor, and then the clean air gets entered into the face, in this case, a hood, and it will exit out the hood through the loose fitting device. Here, it's pretty small, but I just wanted to point out there's two general classes of respirators. And we're talking about NIOSH approved respirators. We have the air purifying class on the left side, 2/3 of this graphic, and then on the right, 1/3, we see the upper class of respirators, the atmosphere supplying respirators, like your supply air and your SCBAs. But the box I put around the respirators that need to be fit tested. And it's sometimes get overlooked, but you cannot conduct qualitative fit testing for any respiratory protection device if the exposures are 10 times the permissible exposure limit. In those cases, you have to go to the upper level of respiratory protection. I'm sorry, the quantitative fit testing method. That's something to be mindful of. So these are common terms that you really need to know if you have any input on a respiratory protection program. The fit factor is just that numerical unitless number that gives you an indicator of how well the respirator fits. A lot of times it's done through instrumentation. Sometimes it'll measure the concentration of particles, for example, outside the mask versus inside the mask. The higher the fit factor, the greater the seal you're getting with that respirator. The assigned protection factor tells you what level of protection the employee gets from that class of respirator that they're wearing. And then the maximum use concentration will tell you how much air contaminant you're protected up to with that particular respirator that you're using. And OSHA has a list of those assigned protection factors for different classes of respirators. So just to give you a couple examples, if we have an employee exposed to toluene and they're wearing a full face APR, that particular respirator gets a assigned protection factor of 50. If you do the math, the current threshold limit value for toluene is 20 parts per million, so they're protected up to 1,000 parts per million. And in the second example, we have a half-face respirator in an atmosphere with silica exposure. That particular respirator gets an assigned protection factor of 10. The current PEL for silica is 50 micrograms, so they're protected up to 50 micrograms per cubic meter. And I will point out that sometimes some agencies or organizations will use a more protective OEL, or occupational exposure limit. So that's why you see TLD sometimes a PEL. So you use those interchangeably when you're calculating your maximum use concentration. So there's a qualitative fit test and a quantitative fit test. Those are the two methods we have for fit testing. Sometimes they're abbreviated QLFT and QNFT. The qualitative fit test is that test that assesses the adequacy of the respirator. It really relies on the human response. And so that's one of the knocks on that type of fit testing method. It relies on the fit test subject to be honest. It has to be an integrity factor. You might have a disgruntled employee that just fails everything, that kind of a thing. The other thing is it uses a test agent, isomyl acetate or banana oil. Saccharin is another popular fit test agent, Victrex, and then we have irritant smoke. Irritant smoke is no longer recommended by NIOSH and AIHA because of the levels of acid gas that it can generate inside the hood. So they kind of discourage the use of irritant smoke. Quantitative fit test is that assessment of the adequacy of a respirator fit numerically measured by leakage, usually through instrumentation. And here we have the key elements of a respiratory protection program. I've sort of intermingled the AIHA requirements for a respiratory protection program with the current ASTM standard for respiratory protection. Of course, you'll have a written program. It'll outline your SOPs for everything from selecting the respirators to the fit testing procedures, medical surveillance. You'll have a program administrator assigned. My recommendation is that you do that in writing by the highest authority in your organization that you can get to sign off on that letter. That person should be competent and knowledgeable in all things respiratory protection. And then arguably the most important aspect of your respiratory protection is having a proper, robust exposure assessment. Because if you're not picking the right respirators, fit testing may not have the weight that it needs to have if you're not even selecting the right respirators and you have the wrong information. Sometimes what we see is people selecting too high of a level of respiratory protection. So that gets into this area where you might be wasting company resources on higher levels of respiratory protection that's needed, for example, like SCBAs or supplied air respirators. So that's something to keep in mind. Section 4, 5, and 6 are sort of done in chronological order. Usually an employee will come in and get medically evaluated, and then they'll get trained, and then they'll get their fit testing. I will point out that there's a current, OSHA has a proposed rule change where they want to get rid of the medical evaluation for the filtering face piece respirators, your N95s, those style of respirators, or your loose fitting hoods. So it remains to be seen how that will pan out, but that will lessen the medical clearance burden for a lot of employees, a lot of employers. And then proper use and maintenance is also a critical piece of your respiratory protection program. OSHA requires an annual audit, or a program evaluation is what they call it. And they actually require you to get feedback from your respirator wearers, your employees that wear respirators. That's something I think that is sometimes overlooked. The ASTM standard for fit testing, for the respiratory protection program, F3387, recommends that you do periodic program assessment or evaluation by an independent party, someone not directly affiliated with the respiratory protection program. And the frequency of that evaluation should be commensurate with the scope and complexity of your respiratory protection program. And then, of course, the record-keeping piece. So fit testing you'll do initially before the first use, whenever a different respirator model is used, whenever there's a change in facial structure due to an accident, scarring, dentures, those types of things, and then you'll repeat that annually. And any other time when an employee throughout the year may complain of comfort or the respirator doesn't seem to fit right, then you'll repeat the fit test. And the mandatory protocols are in Appendix A of the standard. And again, quantitative fit testing is required if the exposures are 10 times the permissible exposure limit. And the fit factor that's required by OSHA for quantitative fit testing is 100 for half-face respirators and 500 for full-face respirators. So here we have a table of the various medical conditions that could affect respirator use and some other factors that your occupational health team will be on the lookout for. And unfortunately, sometimes it won't come to light during the initial medical evaluation when they fill out the form. Early in my career, I fit tested 600 chemical plant workers. We had a 2 million gallon benzene tank in this factory, and so they fit tested everyone. Office workers, everybody got fit tested. And I had a middle-aged lady come up for her fit test, and about 30 seconds into the fit test, everything was fine. And then out of the blue, she grabbed the respirator and just flung it off her face and across the room. And I was just starting out my career, but the two CIHs that I was working for told her, "You're fine. Go ahead and go back to your desk." And they sort of told her she didn't have to get fit tested. So those are things that can happen, and you need to, think those things through, and hopefully those are addressed in your SOPs and your written program. The other thing I'm a big advocate for is relaxed breathing training techniques, meditation, mindfulness. About a year ago, I started using the CPAP, and even early on, I was having problems because I had that dyspnea feeling. And I'm like, this isn't working for me. And then I just remembered that I had this tool in my tool belt. And even now, every once in a while, I'll have that shortness of breath feeling, and I can just kind of override that, trigger my parasympathetic nervous system, and calm myself down. And so I think anyone using a respirator should get some form of relaxed breathing training. At least that's just my opinion. It's certainly not required. Pseudofolliculitis barbae is another thing I wanted to mention. That's something that will come up. I know many of you are probably familiar with that. It's that inflammatory skin condition that from hair curling back on itself once you shave. And I know the military has dealt with this for decades. That's been in the news recently. I think Secretary Hegseth said there's no more shaving waivers, and that it could result in someone having to leave the military. But the Navy updated their no shave waiver policy a few years ago. You can look it up online. If you want to see a model of options that you can give your employees before they have to leave your company or the agency, there are some options that they can work with the medical team, maybe get some type of medical treatment to override that condition. But that's something that I'll just say that as a fit test operator, you don't want to have to argue or deal with these issues on the fly. You can figure it out on your own, especially the facial hair, because that will come up. Hopefully, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, your policies and procedures should outline what to do in those situations. So it's not incumbent upon the fit test operator to figure that out on the fly. We have the qualitative and quantitative fit test methods. This is a table of some of the differences. Again, one of the knock on qualitative fit testing, and I'm not criticizing anyone if you do qualitative fit testing, it's accepted by OSHA, it's perfectly fine, but there are limitations to it. It has that reliance on the human response and their integrity. It's much cheaper, of course, but a lot of companies are going to this quantitative fit testing. If you're considering quantitative fit testing, I would just say talk to the manufacturers, find out what the pluses and minuses are with there's different products out there on the market. There's some that rely on condensation nuclei counter, and others rely on controlled negative pressure. They're all accepted by OSHA, but you have to do your homework, talk to the vendors, talk to people that use those in their companies, and find out what they like, what they don't like about the various products. If you're interested in that type of qualitative fit testing, you could argue or make the case through a cost-benefit analysis that it may over time make sense, because it's much quicker now with the somewhat recently accepted, it's called the read-on protocol, and it shortened the length of a fit test to 2.5 minutes if you use the quantitative fit test method. So wanted to mention that. So a qualitative fit test record, I used to keep a list of copies of really poor fit test records that would come across my desk. And OSHA requires the name, the date, the number, identifier for the employee, and the make, model, style, and size. And they also want to know what type of fit test and the fit test result. And I would say at least 50% of the fit test record that I would see in contractors submitting them for review, they would omit the manufacturer or the model, or they would just put the model number. They wouldn't put the type of respirator. So just be mindful that you really need all those nuggets of information to have a compliant fit test record. So who's qualified to provide fit testing? And I touched upon that earlier. OSHA says they just have to be competent and proficient. The UK has an accreditation program. Fit to Fit, I believe is what they call it. Australia has their version of an accreditation program. The US does not currently have a fit testing accreditation program. So some of these are out of the ASTM standard that you see on the bottom. They have a full checklist that you can use to evaluate the competency and proficiency of your fit test operators. I highly recommend that you do so, especially if you use contractors, so that you can prove to compliance officers or to your employees that you're going that extra step to make sure that you're getting what you're paying for with a fit testing contract. Facial hair can impair the seating of the respirator. You see some numbers out there, up to 1,000 times more leakage compared to someone who's clean shaven. So I recommend you add a facial hair policy into your written program to follow what it means to be clean shaven. And NIOSH has guidance on their website. This is just a sample facial hair policy that I'm providing. I adapted it from AIHA. One thing I'll point out is that the last statement will really get you out of a lot of things. When employees want to put things on their hair, bandanas or ball caps or do-rags, or sometimes they want to modify the respirator, that's sort of a catch-all clause. When there's an issue that comes to light, either doing fit testing or out in the field, this is sort of your little benchmark. Well, does it affect the fit or function of the respirator? The answer is yes. It's not a lot. So I would recommend that you devise an approach that fits for your program, your company. Consult with your HR, legal team, occupational medical team, and others, and just devise something that you're going to go with. One thing that I was advised earlier in my career is you don't tell someone that they have to shave, because that can set you up for all kinds of problems. Just simply say that I cannot fit test someone who's not clean shaven for OSHA regulations and NIOSH recommendations. We have shaving gear that you're welcome to use, or you can talk to your supervisor on how to proceed. But that's how I recommend that you handle those issues. And then, of course, if someone doesn't want to shave for religious reasons or any other reason, sometimes you can try a PAPR with a loose-fitting hood. Work with your IH and your exposure assessment to see if that's something that you can even consider. And those are some other ideas that you might consider. In terms of some human errors that we see during qualitative fit testing, sometimes we see people not directing the aerosol output whenever they're using the nebulizer. So, want to make sure that when you're, we'll demonstrate this here in a moment, but you want to make sure that you're directing the aerosol output not directly into the filtration device or the respirator, but you want to direct it toward the voids in the hood itself. And I'll demonstrate this in a moment. Don't spray directly into the filter. Spraying the aerosol into the wrong opening, and I'll demonstrate that in this picture. I'm not sure if you can tell, but they're putting the...
For lunch.
They're directing the spray.
You sure?
Little opening here. And really, it's up there where you want to direct the aerosol spray. The other thing is sometimes we'll see people grabbing the little nebulizer with their fingertips. You're not getting a full spray of aerosol. Pretend like you're milking a cow and give that thing a really good squeeze. That's the only analogy I think come up with. I think it works pretty well. Excessive tilting of the nebulizer, so you want to make sure that you're not tilting it. You want to keep it in a vertical upright position. Sometimes we see incorrect number of squeezes. We'll talk about that in a moment. The exercise times being cut too short. They're a full minute long. Not not using the required exercise or modifying the exercises. So, which is very clear on the mandatory protocol. So you want to make sure that you follow that. And we'll cover that in a moment. Misconceptions about fit testing. A passing fit test applies universally to all make and models. Of course, that's not correct. Whenever you get fitted for, that's the respirator, the one and only respirator style that you can use, model, make, size. Sometimes we'll have somebody show up at the 5 o'clock shadow and they say, come on, fit test me, I know I can pass. Well, that's not the issue. It's sort of a showstopper. If someone shows up not clean shaven, you go into your spiel. I'm sorry, I cannot fit test someone who's not clean shaven. There are OSHA regulations and recommendations. So keep that in mind. There's another misconception that you only have to be clean shaven at the time of fit testing. Of course, that's not correct. Anytime you put the respirator on, a tight fitting respirator, you have to be clean shaven. Personally supplied or improvised respirators are acceptable. Of course, that's not correct. During the pandemic, we had people bringing on their own types of respirators. And so that's something that you should address in your written program. We highly recommend that people do not bring their own types of respirators, but if you do, you're going to have to make sure that you clear those devices, that you look at them, make sure they're NIOSH approved, that kind of a thing. Any minor modification to a respirator will void the NIOSH approval, so that's another misconception. So, of course, during the pandemic, we saw people trying to double mask or put surgical mask under N95s, and that voids the NIOSH approval. So that's something that is another misconception that we see. So in terms of the sequence of events, the respirator, you want to make sure that the employee will show up clean shaven, medically cleared, they've been trained. You want to make sure that they inspect the respirator properly, they're putting it on correctly. You want to look out for any of those negative psychological responses that may show up, anxiety, claustrophobia, panic attacks. You want to make sure they do their proper seal checks. And it's perfectly acceptable to coach them through it, especially if they're a first-time user or infrequent user. The sensitivity test, we'll go through that. That's to make sure that the fit test subject can detect the solution that you're testing them against. And then I have a fit test subject that you can come up with as you're ready, Dr. Yassine. So I'm going to have him, between the successful sensitivity test and then the actual fit test, we're going to have him take a bottle of water that you can take a drink of and wipe your mouth down and your cheek so that there's no residual sensitivity solution. And then we'll do the fit test following the OSHA mandatory protocol, and of course we'll do the documentation. And I just wanted to mention that there's really takes a village to have a successful respiratory protection program. Your respiratory protection program administrator, your dental hygienist, your fit test operator, maybe the same person or maybe different people, human resources, legal. I touched upon a lot of these, but everyone has a critical role to play in a successful respiratory protection program. I would argue that the respirator users are the ones that are most critical, because that's where you find out if they're using it, if they have a discipline, execution, and that they're buying into that overarching goal of protecting themselves and from that adverse health outcomes from exposure to air contaminants. These are some resources that you can have access to, and with that, we'll jump into the demonstration. So first off, I'm going to have Dr. Yassine. Thank you for volunteering to be our fit test subject. First off, we're going to conduct the I have the nebulizer And I want to make sure that these caps are off. I'm going to pour in some, this is a sensitivity solution. It's 100 times less concentrated than the actual fit test solution that I'll be using. You've been trained, you've been medically cleared. Any questions? I'll explain what the purpose of the fit test is. And, again, I say that we need to bring in wisdom to fit testing, meaning passion, empathy, altruism. You're part of something bigger than yourself. You just have to get empathetic. Because a person may be using a respirator for the first time, they may have concerns, anxiety. So we'll have to put the hood on. I'm going to tilt it a little bit. And then just open your mouth a little and breathe in through your mouth. Open it up a little bit. I'm not going to spray it directly into the mouth. I'm going to put it into the void. I'm going to start with 10 squeezes. You tell me if you taste it. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. He tasted the solution. You can take that off. What it tastes like. Yeah. Okay, so that's a successful sensitivity test. And you'll notice I didn't go, I think I stopped at 6, but OSHA says you go 1 through 10, then 10 through 20, and up to 30. But I'm going to record it as 10 squeezes for this gentleman. And so he passed the sensitivity test. So I'm going to have you, this is a fresh bottle of water. Go ahead and open that up. Drink the water, get rid of that sensitivity solution. Ask you to just pour some here and wipe your mouth.
And that's not Evian, right? It's good. That's not Evian. It's good U.S. water, right?
That's right. Good point. Wipe your mouth. Now, I'm going to the fit solution. Same thing. Let me go ahead and have you put the respirator on. There is a mandatory 5-minute comfort assessment period, so we want to get that started. And so this is a half-pace respirator. I have P100 filters, so you have to be mindful. Whatever fit test solution, you want to make sure some use organic vapor cartridges. This particular type of fit test solution requires on a filter. So P100 filter is any type of filter, pre-filter will work. So you want to go ahead and put that on. Back that off if you want to. You can offer a respirator wipe if they so like. So he's doing his proper inspection. I can help coach. It's a first-time user, but they want to look at the exhalation valve, make sure it's present, and over time it can get deformed in sort of a wobbly shape. That one looks good. It's flat. Pop that baby back on. You look at the inflation valve. Inflation valves are present, intact, so you can go ahead and put that respirator on. Upstream. You want to make sure you put the solution below the O-ring. You want to go above the O-ring. You want to make sure that this little device, this question mark shape, the device inside the nebulizer is pushed all the way down. And sometimes I'll wear gloves because I'm spilling out some of the solution on my hands. But it's not necessarily toxic or chemical I'm worried about. Okay, so I have a fit test solution. He's did his seal checks. I see you. Okay. So he has a perfectly situated. The cradle is high on his head. That's where you want it. He has maximum tension in the straps, and so. Go ahead, put the hood on. Okay. So. See what I almost did there? I'm going to put in 10 squeezes initially. I'm pushing it to the void. Hood, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Because he had a 10 squeeze sensitivity solution result. And so every 30 seconds, I'll be adding another 5 squeezes, half of the number of the sensitivity squeezes, just to keep that concentration of test solution somewhat stable, steady state, I guess. Now, please take deep breaths. And at any time, if you taste this solution, you let me know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, turn your head side to side and breathe a couple times. Reach the each side. Okay, so I bumped it 5 more squeezes. That's later. Something I did mention, the protocol suggests that you open your mouth and breathe through your mouth. I can't tell what you're doing. Not that will validate the test. Breathe through your mouth, open, breathe through your mouth as much as you possibly can. And these exercises are 1 minute long. Now, up and down again. Breathe a couple times. Get to the position, up and down. All right, so the next exercise is talking. So I have the rainbow passage. Please read that clearly, please. If the fit test subject can't read for any reason, you can have them come to 100 or say ABCs or recite the months of the year, just to get them talking, to challenge the respirator while talking. But this one's so hard to. Sure. Step back, please. We'll have him bend over and breathe a couple times when you get to the bottom position. And ready? Press. Up. Keep on the chest. And then the last exercise, for 5 seconds, will be the normal breathing. We'll repeat the normal breathing exercise. Okay? Please. Close to running out of time, but so far you have basically the solution. Looks like it's a good fit, just visually by observation. One thing that OSHA requires you to do is to make sure that the nebulizer is working. So this curtain is a perfect. Maybe those of you up front can see, but can you see the spray? So if I test it against a dark background and I don't see that the nebulizer's working, that invalidates the test and we have to repeat the whole thing. But so you're done. One thing I will point out, OSHA doesn't require this, but what some people will do is have the fit test subject break the seal, and then we'll squeeze in some of the fit test solution just to make sure that they can detect the fit test solution. We won't do that here, but that is something ASTM standard recommends. So, round of applause for good to go. All I had. Thank you for your attention.